If humans lived to be 500 years old, what hobbies would you get around to getting good at? Bonsai. I thought about that too, but I think the zen in bonsai is contributing to something that you won't see come to completion or fruition. There should be a bonsai trading subreddit. Bonsai gardening would be very fun. It wouldn't be intimidating to start growing trees. Don't be intimidated by growing a tree. The world needs more trees. I'm not saying plant an oak tree 3 feet from your house. That's going to be a headache in 30 years. But plant a tree. Plant 20 more than you want and chop the ones you don't want down and keep the best one. No need to be intimidated. It's amazing to watch a tree grow, and most trees don't need 500 years. Most trees' lifespans are only 100 to 200 years and many are shorter. Bonsai master. On that time scale, gardening becomes terraforming. I'd make one of those Frankenstein trees where you graft all the other fruit tree branches on. I remember in Skyrim when you go to Lord Harkon's castle to go to the soul dimension. Forgot name. You pass by Serana's mother's garden. She says, "You have any idea what a garden looks like after hundreds of years of being tended to by a master?" The garden looked like shit though. But it had abounded for like 3,000 years, so person shrugging, medium skin tone. A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. Greek proverb. You could finally plant trees that you yourself could rest under the of someday. People would be growing prize-winning sequoias. I think planting a tree that takes like 100 years to grow would be kinda cool to do if we live to be 500. I loved this idea. I also want to learn gardening. That's a tremendous idea. A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. Old Greek proverb. I'm already good at nothing but 500 years and I can perfect it. What's the difference between being good at doing nothing and being perfect at doing nothing? We'd get really good at practicing safe sex for the sole sake of avoiding reproduction. As a matter of fact, there'd probably be a global restriction put in place only allowing people to reproduce once a century. Imagine seeing your great 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 grandchildren when you're around 400 years old. A common trope in fantasy literature is that the longer a species lives or the more powerful it is, the somewhat proportionally lesser its fertility rate tends to be. So elves have children once every few centuries, whereas it could be considered a near miracle if a dragon manages to have more than one offspring throughout its life of many millennia. I would take a hell of a lot more care of my teeth, etc. Plenty of time, since you probably wouldn't reach puberty until 70 or so. We needed to start doing that 500 years ago, even with current lifespan. Well, not once a century, but control it. Or pregnancy would take longer. Living so old would probably get our body to do things much slower. If you need today plus minus 20 years time be considered fully grown and with a life expectancy of plus minus 100 years old, I'd say we might use 90 years for adolescent time. Not if we invented ways around all world limits. I'm all for implementing that now. You should really read a short story by Kurt Vonnegut. It's about just what you're talking about. It's called To Be Ro To Be. Hopefully this link will work. Smiley face. Edit. Spelling. Learning languages and just expanding general knowledge. Also seeing more of the world. Collecting citizenships. Don't let a country tie you down. 50 years max. Yes, the most powerful polyglot. I agree. My answer to the "what would your superpower be?" question is always hear a language once and instantly learn it. I dream about having enough time to learn to speak every language, even dead ones. You don't need a lifetime to learn a language. 10 days are enough to learn the basics. Of course, you need to put your ego aside and be humble enough to stumble all over again. Source: I speak 4 languages and recently wrote an article about how you can learn the basics of a language in 10 days. All I hear is someone saying, John passed at the age of 110. And someone replying, he was so young. This was kinda my train of thought. If we could live to be 500 years old, I'd imagine it'd be a much rarer feat than someone nowadays living to be 100. Considering how easily damaged and accident-prone we are, for having big brains, we really are a fantastically flawed machine. After reading this, I can't get the quote out of my head from the Sorcerer's Stone where Harry and Hermione are discussing immortality at the library. The only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover. Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Pernell. The world would be even more overpopulated. Not 110, but my country's life expectancy is ridiculous. And it's not uncommon to hear the phrase, she died in an accident at 81. She was so young. So sad. Quote, because people in my area nowadays, well, barring the corona BS, are expected to pass at least 90 plus. Obviously, with retired folks getting pensions at least, sometimes twice, as big as most salaries, and a 60% young unemployment rate. Things are getting tricky to maintain, with grandparents being the primary source of income on many households. I mean, my still young 79 granny gets a monthly €2,100 paycheck. And I'm considered privileged by doing €1,200 per meter, being exploited on approximately 200 hours per month position at 32. I don't know, to be honest. But dating would be really weird. Met this gal last weekend. She's 412 years old. Oh dude, that's just wrong. You're only 112. How can you be with a chick that's 300 years older than you? Quote, you know the rule, dude, half your age plus 50. I wonder if they'd be better at sex or finally get sick of it. Let's say the average age these days is 100. Even though it isn't. Your scenario would be the equivalent of a 20-year-old going out with an 80-year-old. The outrage people would have when they see a 450-yo man dating an 18-yo girl. What even kind of music does she listen to? Paganini? She was alive for the Enlightenment period, for God's sake. Come on, man. That's just cradle of cradle of cradle of cradle robbing at this point. You can't let someone alive during the Industrial Revolution be tied down to such a cougar. This might be one of the few serious answers, but cooking, even if some don't consider it a hobby, I would learn recipes from all around the world, so when someone is in the mood for something, I can make the best possible version of that thing. When you get good at cooking, you don't just learn recipes. Over time, you adapt them and change them subtly to your own tastes. Eventually they become your own, and after 500 years, my God, you'd make some mouths water from the smell of your kitchen. I've been doing that during quarantine and it's great. I'm weird though. I can make these pretty difficult meals, but I can't fucking get cheese sauce right. Look, if fucking cooking isn't a hobby, then what the actual fuck is? Fuck those people who say it isn't a hobby. These people ask you, so what are your hobbies? Quote, and if you don't respond with some utterly boring, prohibitively expensive middle-class form of exercise, e.g. bouldering, the sailing, they'll start gatekeeping the definition of the word hobby. Rant. Living for 500 years would make grandma recipes meaningless. It would actually make you look completely different at grandparents, as they would still be youngsters. Imagine how many grandparents one would have. It's rewarding. I've spent the last 5 years learning to cook, and man, I don't care if you live only 80 years. It's completely worth taking the time to learn. I learned in phases, and everyone I know now knows me as a dude who can throw down some decent scratch. Completely worth the time to learn. This is completely opposite of what I do for work or have as any other hobby. I can make a decent dish from many different cultures at this point, and can make anything work in my kitchen with just a few ingredients. I'm comfortable with that. Totally underrated skill. even if you have a million cooking shows and pros around. One big thing that helped me get really into cooking was to try one new recipe per week for half a year. I have small kids, so we did Movie Mondays, where I had pre-chosen a movie and based on that movie, usually of a major children's animated movie brand that also has their own streaming service, I'd cook a meal. I learned how to make Kenyan samosas while my kids watched Lion King, cottage pie while watching Brave, etc. It was an incredible experience for all of us and taught me new recipes and techniques. We would act like 20-year-olds until we were 450 and then shove every last bit of live in the last little bit. So not much different. Emo was about to say procrastinating to the extreme. Lol. For me, that would mean happily being a virgin and or single for at least the first century or two of my life. Unfortunately, this is the real answer. The reason I don't take up hobbies isn't because of my lifespan. It's because I spend my days working, and my nights and weekends feeling tired and just wanting to relax and be with friends. Maybe it would be different if we had 48 hours in a day, and still only needed to work and sleep for 16 of those hours. Do we physically age the same, or is it spread out over time? In order for humans to live 500 years, they would have to age slower, or else our immune system would be too weak to live that long. Right? Am I going to be a 50-year-old baby like Yoda? Spread out over time. Imagining teenage years lasting for 20 years or so. Yikes. For them and the people who would be around. If the past 2 months have taught me anything, nothing. If the past 2 months have taught me anything, I'll start a bunch and then abandon them. Though with 500 years maybe I'd pick a few back up. Well, if it's any consolation, I'd still be a virgin for the most part. I've achieved the square root of fuck all with all this spare time. I built a backfiat from scratch. By 100 virtuoso guitar. By 200 piano maestro. By 300 drums, baby. By 400 ace of bass. By 500 harmonica blues master. Edit. Some futurists believe that the first person to live to the age of 150 is already alive right now. And the first person who will live to be 1,000 years old will be born by 2040. Interesting side note. Now let the Redditing continue. As if humanity will make it past this year. I recently read an article that some believe we've reached a break-even point where every year that passes, our life expectancy is now increasing by more than 1 year. These futurists sound like the ones in the 60s that thought we'd have cities on Mars by the 90s. The idea that we can go from the current record of 116 years, verified, to 1,000 by someone born in the next 20 years is insane. Any and every trade-based job, so therefore I don't have to spend a shit ton of money in order to maintain my home, vehicle, and just be able to rely on my own knowledge on being able to fix things. To be honest, the ultimate handyman. Yeah, I'd want to be like the dad in Swiss Family Robinson. Kids riding ostriches and shit. Build a crazy-ass tree mansion. Tons of people do this already. Assuming technology progresses at the same rate it is, this would be nearly impossible. You think, 100 years ago mechanics on cars were working with mildly advanced steam engines. Now they need to work on things so advanced they made the spaceships of the 60s and 70s look like scientific calculators. Folding a fitted sheet. This guy. I still don't think I could be bothered, honestly. IDK, but my Minecraft base finna be lit. There still won't let be vertical slabs. I just realized that languages and their evolution is so fucking weird. Say that sentence to someone even 10 years ago and you'd confuse the fuck out of them. Not much would change, probably. If a 500-year lifespan was normal for humans like a 70-ish year lifespan is normal for us, then our lives would just be spread out longer. In a world like that, school would last for like 30 years. You work for centuries, etc. Wasn't Tolkien big on lifespan relativism? Like hobbits had their 20s and humans had their teens as their respective period of life, with much carefree frolicking and troublemaking before they matured. So I think you're right on it. If living so long was the norm, having a hobby for 100 years would be like someone now having a hobby for 10. The burden for becoming a master would elongate. Probably. I wonder what would change based on the circumstance. If it's humans have always loved about 500 years, versus this is the first generation of superhumans, who now will likely all live to be 500. Oh, or, if every 500 years, a certain percentage of the population born were humans that would live to be 500, with the rest having normal lifespans. It is possible that future longer-lived generations would be stupid to assume that a longer lifespan necessitates more schooling years. But I hope humanity will be wise enough to look back at our generations as being overschooled. Even given shorter lifespans, more learning would become necessary and possible as a result of longer lifespans. But I envision the learning process being spread out and concurrent with other stages of life, as opposed to being concentrated in an overly long schooling years stage of life. 12 years of schooling is 12 years of schooling, whether one dies at 50 or 500. And given technology and questions over the necessity of our current education structure, extending schooling years would be overkill. Oh my God, I'd still be in school. Kill me now. Work for centuries. Oh no. TBH, though I feel like divorce and getting remarried would be a lot more common even if time span doesn't feel like much has changed. It's still extra years to grow off somebody. No way I'm working for centuries. Compounding interest would be amazing over 500 years. Like how Baby Yoda is 50. It doesn't say anything about the speed of learning slowing down. So it would still be the same systems, it would just be a smaller time span compared to the other 500 years. Lately I've been working on memorizing every country's name and location on the globe. If I had 500 years, I could try to memorize every city. How's that going? I think I was in 4th grade when we had to memorize all of the South and Central American countries. It was pretty easy. Blank map and a normal one. Write in the names really lightly. Erase them and do it again. My sad ass doesn't know where all the states are though. Just play EU4. But there would be new cities over time. And some names would change. Perhaps some cities would be destroyed. Or be relegated to town status. Go for it. A friend of mine can name every single country plus its capital and it's so cool. Question. Does this affect our reproduction? If so, how, and if not, then overpopulation would be rampant, thus driving our push for interstellar travel and colonization of habitable planets. If the latter, I'd put forth an effort to study geology, engineering, physics and medicine. I'd be an explorer. I'd search whole planets and build a life for those looking to leave an overpopulated Earth. If the former, I'd invest my life in childcare and education so that I could help raise my kids, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as well as to teach them so that they themselves can be positive influence on the world and the people who they meet. Rimworld. I mean, if reproduction stays the exact same as right now, with most women not being able to give birth after 50, there might actually be a drop in childbirth, seeing as if you're living till you're 500. 50 would still be really young to you and you might not want a kid at that time. Pregnant for 45 months. Maybe opening and running a vineyard. If I have 500 years, I'm sure I could make that happen before I go, and the only thing I know about it is that wine is good. Would still procrastinate probably, but you'd be even better at it. So much more practice. 500-year-old humans are still human. Yep. Why do it today? We've got 500 fucking years to get it done. And you'd procrastinate longer too. Years instead of weeks, months. Chess. It's a very intellectual game. And it would be nice to keep my mind sharp after all that time. Not the way my 7-year-old plays it, tee hee hee. Learn every language, like even those endangered languages with 2 native speakers. Just try to learn Ethkal now. There are 7,111 languages spoken in the world today. To put this into context, Kenneth Hale, a possible world record holder, supposedly learned 50 languages by the time he died at 67. Kenneth Hale learned 0.74 languages for every year of his life. If you were to learn every language in the world by the age of 500, you would need to learn more than 14 languages for every year of your life. You would be learning more than 1 new language every month. If you were to learn every language in the world by the age of 500, you would need to be about 19 times more talented at learning languages than one of the most talented linguists on record. Same. God, I spend way too much time thinking about this topic. Cooking, music, architecture, medicine, teaching, writing, but most of all, conversing. Connecting with people through conversation is one of the most meaningful things a person can do. And I want to get better at it. There's not nearly enough time to cram all of this into a lifetime. Oh yeah? And I feel like the pressure of finding and building a career I feel like just wouldn't be there. There would be more emphasis on discovering yourself and a cultural pressure to go on journeys of self-discovery. Whereas that kind of stuff is in our world is seen more as, okay, do it if you have the funds, but hurry back and get started on your career. How important would money and materialistic goods be in a world where people lived that long? I really feel like skills and connections would define people so much more than what they have. Very cool. Connecting with another person seems underrated but can actually be very rewarding. Cooking. There's no point in being 500 and not knowing how to make a good meal. I'd perfect the ones I do. Photography and filmmaking. I'd be able to shoot my age in golf. Tortoising. Having a tortoise as a pet and outlive it. Drawing. I find it so frustrating that I was never taught the fundamental basics of rendering 3D shapes on a 2D surface. The nitty-gritty of anatomy. Rendering light and shadow correctly and just overall becoming a badass artist. It's hard not to be bitter considering I found myself graduated from college woefully underskilled for the art jobs I wanted. I find myself 5 years out of college a lot better at art than I had been when I graduated college, but not good enough to get into the industry yet. I hope I get good enough to get a job soon. Probably my taxes. Parkour would be a hell of a lot of fun to get exceedingly good at. Pushing my physical body to the limits of what's possible with extreme precision. Bring back Shinobi. I feel like joints would wear out all the same. I would try and perfect a new language every year. Dumbledore spoke 150 languages, so I'm sure I could make it to 10. Same. Spending 10 years learning languages wouldn't feel like so much if it was out of 500 rather than out of 80 to 100. Modding games, because why not? Flipping playing cards into a hat. Learn guitar so I can be the guitar guy at the party. Think I might drink a Coke and Bacardi. I doubt you'd need long to learn how to play Wonderwall. Learn Wonderwall. Imagine what life would be like. So cool, right? Like to see all of these PPL having all of these skills and talents developed over all those years. I would probably try to master cooking in multiple languages. Anything that didn't involve breaking my hip at 75. The next 400 years would be pretty weak. Programming, blacksmithing, woodworking. I wouldn't necessarily change what I'm doing, but I'd put a lot more time into mastering everything I can.